There's a question I've been sitting with for a while now. And it's not a hard question on the surface. In fact, most people, if you ask them, would say it's barely a question at all. The question is, what's the difference between morality and ethics? And the most common answer you'll get is some version of they're the same thing, just different words, which is understandable. Because in everyday conversation, we use them interchangeably all the time. Someone does something we disapprove of and we say, that's just wrong. It's unethical. It's immoral. As if those two words are just synonyms stacked on top of each other for emphasis. But here's what I find interesting. Philosophers don't treat them as the same. Lawyers don't treat them as the same. Anthropologists also don't treat them as the same. And once you start pulling at that thread, once you actually look at how these two concepts behave differently in the real world, you realize that conflating them isn't just imprecise, it actually causes a specific kind of confusion. A confusion that explains a lot of disagreements that we see in public life, in workplaces, in families. So that's what this video is about. Beyond just defining two terms, but tracing the logic of each one, where it comes from, what it demands of you, and what happens when the two come into conflict. Let's start from the beginning. What is morality? The word morality comes from Latin mores, which means customs, habits, character. It's about how a person is at their core. Morality is personal. It's the set of convictions you carry inside yourself about what's right and what's wrong. It's shaped by the things that formed you, your upbringing, religion or the lack of it, culture, your experiences and your gut instincts. Morality doesn't require justification. That's actually one of its defining features. If I ask you, why is it wrong to hurt an innocent person? You don't reach for an argument, you don't construct a logical proof. You feel it. It's immediate. It's almost pre-rational. You just know. That's morality operating. Now, the interesting thing about moral convictions is that they're yours. They're internal. They don't necessarily require anyone else to share them. You might believe deeply and sincerely that eating meat is wrong, or that lying is wrong, even to protect someone, or that certain kinds of loyalty are sacred regardless of the consequences. These are moral positions. And they're yours. This is why when we talk about someone having moral character, we're pointing at something interior. We're saying that this person in their private self has certain commitments. And notice, morality can be highly specific to a person, a community, a culture, etc. What was morally acceptable in the 12th century Europe is not morally acceptable today. What is considered a moral obligation in one culture might be considered irrelevant or offensive in another. This doesn't mean that morality is random, but it does mean that morality is embedded. It grows out of somewhere. It has a context. Think of morality as the soil. It is particular. It belongs to a specific place. There's also something important about how morality operates emotionally. Moral violations produce what psychologists call moral emotions like guilt, shame, disgust, or indignation. These aren't just intellectual reactions, they're visceral. They happen in the body before they happen in the mind. John Haidt, the social psychologist, argued that most of our moral reasoning is actually post hoc, rationalization. We have a gut reaction first, this is wrong, and then we construct reasons to explain it afterward. The reasons feel like the cause, but actually they're the justification. There's truth in that, even if it's uncomfortable. Because it means that when you and I have a moral disagreement, we're not really having an argument about logic. We're having a collision between two sets of gut feelings, each trying to clothe themselves in reasoning. Which is why moral arguments can feel so personal, so heated, and so impossible to resolve by just stating facts at each other. Morality is intimate. It is not neutral. Now, ethics. The word comes from the Greek ethos, also meaning character, but specifically social character, the character of a group, the norms that govern a community. Ethics is systematic. It's an attempt to reason through what is right and wrong, not just feel it, but examine it, question it, test against its principles, and arrive at positions that can be applied consistently. Ethics asks, can we justify this? Not just feel it, but justify it. Would this hold up to scrutiny? Does this apply equally to everyone in the same situation? What are the underlying principles here? Ethics is what happens when you step back from your personal moral convictions and try to build something more universal, more rigorous, more transferable. This is why we have professional ethics, medical ethics, legal ethics, journalistic ethics, research ethics. These are not personal conviction systems. They are codes. Frameworks. They exist because in a given profession you have people from many different moral backgrounds, different cultures, religions, intuitions, and they all need to operate by a common standard. Ethics provides that standard. A doctor might personally have strong religious beliefs about end-of-life care. Their morality might tell them one thing very clearly. But medical ethics, as a professional framework, will present a different, more complex set of considerations. Patient autonomy, informed consent, null maleficence, beneficence, justice. And here's the key tension here. The doctor is expected to set aside their personal morality and operate within the ethical framework of their profession. That's actually a job requirement. Which means that ethics is, in a sense, the public face of moral reasoning. It's what happens when morality gets examined, debated, refined, and codified so that it can function across a society, not just inside one person's head. But wait, there's more. There's another important distinction here. Ethics is revisable in a way that morality often is not. Because ethics is systematic and based on reasoning, you can actually argue about it. You can present new information, new scenarios, new philosophical arguments, and the ethical framework can shift. We've seen this happen historically. Medical ethics in the 20th century went through enormous changes as we thought more clearly about patient rights. Business ethics has evolved substantially as we've reckoned with corporate power and environmental impact. But morality? Morality is much harder to revise because it's not primarily grounded in argument. It's grounded in conviction, in identity, in what you are. You can change someone's ethical possession with a well-reasoned argument. It's very hard to change their moral convictions with the same way. Because you're not just asking them to update a belief, you're asking them to change who they are. Think of morality as the roots. Think of ethics as the branches and leaves, visible, structured, shaped by the environment, and capable of growing in new directions. So far, so good. Morality is personal, intuitive, embedded. Ethics is systematic, reasoned, and professional. But the really interesting territory is where the two come apart, where they point in different directions. Because this is where real life actually lives. Imagine an employee at a large company. She discovers that her employer has been quietly falsifying environmental data. Not enough to cause an immediate visible crisis, but enough to mask long-term damage. Her professional environment, corporate culture, the implicit code says, you don't do this. You don't go outside. You don't expose the company. But her morality says, this is wrong. People are being harmed. Someone needs to know. So she has to choose between the two codes. One is the moral code she carries inside herself. The other is a kind of institutional ethical code. Not written down, but very real. When she blows the whistle, we typically applaud her. We say she did the right thing. And what we mean, though we don't always articulate it this way, is that her personal morality was more truthful than the institutional ethics of a company. She tells us something important. Ethical codes can be corrupted. They can be shaped by power, by self-interest, by expedience. And when that happens, individual moral conviction can be the corrective. Now, let's reverse the scenario. A soldier in wartime is given orders that strike him as morally troubling. Maybe it's a mission that will cause civilian harm. his personal moral instincts recoil from it. But military ethics as a framework operates on different principles, like chain of command, mission priority, the greater strategic picture. The idea that individual moral judgment, if allowed to override collective decisions in combat, leads to operational chaos. Here, the ethical framework demands that he suppresses individual moral response and act within the system, which we find deeply uncomfortable. And we should. Because it's exactly this logic, I was following orders, that has been used to justify atrocities. But we also know that armies can't function if every soldier acts solely on their personal moral conviction. There's no clean answer here. Only the recognition that neither morality nor ethics has automatic priority. The tension between them is real. It has to be negotiated. Here's a quieter, more ordinary example. Your close friend has written something, a business plan, a creative project, a speech, and they're really excited about it. They ask what you think. You think it's not very good. Your morality might say honesty is a virtue. I care about this person. I should tell them the truth. But there's also kind of interpersonal ethics, an unspoken code of friendship that says be kind, be encouraging. Don't crush someone's enthusiasm unnecessarily. Which do you follow? Most people navigate this by trying to find some middle ground, some honest but gentle version of the feedback. But middle ground is in itself an ethical construction. You're not just following your gut. You're reasoning through competing obligations and trying to find a principled response. That's ethics doing its work. There's a pattern in all these three cases. Do you see it? Morality tells you what you feel is right. Ethics asks you to examine whether what you feel is right actually holds up. And sometimes the examination confirms the feeling, and sometimes it complicates it. The person who acts purely on moral instinct without ethical reflection can be self-righteous or rigid and incapable of seeing beyond their own cultural conditioning. The person who acts purely on ethical reasoning without any moral ground beneath it can become cold, procedural, and detached from the human reality of what they're deciding. The goal, and this is a goal, not a destination, is to have both. To have moral conviction and ethical rigor. Roots and branches. But why does this matter now? I want to bring this somewhere specific. Because I don't think this is just a philosophical exercise. We're living in a moment where moral conviction is very loud. Everyone is very sure about what is right. On every side of every issue, people are not just expressing moral outrage. They're not saying, I believe you are incorrect. They're saying, you are a bad person for believing what you believe. Morality has expanded. Ethics has contracted. So I think there'll be a cost to that. Because when you moralize everything, When every disagreement becomes a moral failing, a different opinion is treated like a character defect, you lose the ability to reason with each other. You lose the ability to actually think through hard questions as a community. Because the moment a question becomes a moral question, it stops being an intellectual question. It becomes an identity question. And identity questions don't get argued out, they get fought out. This is why the distinction matters practically. Not because ethics is always better than morality, we've seen it can be corrupted, but because ethical reasoning gives you a tool that moral conviction alone does not: the ability to examine yourself, to question whether your gut feeling is actually tracking truth or whether it's tracking your tribe, your upbringing, and your ego. The philosopher Iris Murdoch had a beautiful phrase for this ethical life. She called it attention. Paying close, honest attention to reality, not your feelings about reality, but to reality itself, to the actual human being in front of you, to actual consequences of your actions, to actual complexity of a situation. That kind of attention is hard. It's harder than moral certainty. It requires you to hold your convictions with some degree of lightness, which feels dangerous when your convictions are connected to your sense of self. But I think it's the only way to actually think well, to actually do good. Not just to feel like you're doing good. So, where does that leave us? Let's go back to the beginning. Morality and ethics. Are they the same thing? No, I didn't just waste 23 of your minutes. They are not the same thing. They're related. Deeply related. And you can't have functional ethics without some moral foundation beneath it. And moral conviction without ethical reflection tends to become dogma. They need each other. But they're not the same. They operate differently. They come from different places. They make different demands. Morality says, this is what I believe is right. Ethics asks, can we examine that belief? Can we reason through it? Can we build something consistent and fair out of it? The tension between those two moves, conviction and examination, is not a problem to be solved. It is, I would argue, the very engine of moral progress. Every significant expansion of who we consider worthy of moral consideration, enslaved people, women, children, animals, came from someone whose moral instinct said, this is wrong, and whose ethical reasoning helped them articulate why and to whom and with what implications. Neither alone was enough. Both together changed the world. I leave you with one question. Not to answer aloud, but just to sit with. Think of a belief you hold strongly, something you consider morally certain. Now ask yourself, have I actually examined this? Or have I just felt this way? There's no shame in the second answer. We all start here. But the examined version, the one that's been tested and still holds, is worth so much more, both to you and the people your beliefs attract. That's it for this one.